Good day and welcome to the first Navigating Drought in the Missouri River Basin webinar. My name is Jason Gerlich and I'm with the National Integrated Drought Information System. For this first webinar and for the series going forward, presenters will provide the region with timely information on current and developing drought conditions, current and developing hydrologic conditions, and also discuss observed impacts and other relevant updates from across this region. Additionally, these webinars will feature relevant drought research and finding from partners all across this region. Speakers may also discuss the impacts of these conditions on topics such as water resources, wildfires, recreation, and ecosystems. Webinars and recordings and other supporting materials will be posted on drought.gov later this week, and if you are signed up for our emails, you will receive notification when those are available. After today's webinar, you will have an opportunity to provide feedback that will help us improve these webinar series. Please take a moment to tell us what you think and provide any useful feedback that you may have in order to improve upon this webinar series going forward. Today, our speakers, you can see them here on the screen here, are Zachary Hoylman from the Montana Climate Office in the University of Montana. He'll be providing the seasonal and current drought conditions update. We have Scott Doomer from NOAA's National Weather Service and Missouri River Basin Forecast Center to provide us the Missouri River hydrologic update. Our agricultural impacts speaker will be Miranda Meeham from North Dakota State University Department of Agriculture. And then finally will be Drought Adaptation Resources for Wyoming Producers by Hannah and Callie at the University of Wyoming. For this presentation, we'll be using the Q&A chat box to the right side of your screen. Please put any questions that you may have during these presentations in that chat box, and we will address those and additional questions during the Q&A period after the 4 presentations. Now, before we begin, I wanted to make sure to highlight the partners who make this webinar series possible. These partners are instrumental in the development of these webinars, and the products and services they provide are pivotal for staying updated on conditions across the basin. I'll put at the conclusion of my presentation here the websites for each one of these partners in the chat box if you're interested in getting more information. Those of you who may not be familiar with NIDIS, NIDIS was established in 2006 by public law with a mission of improving the nation's capacity to proactively manage drought-related risks. NIDIS provides the best information and resources available to assess the potential for drought and to better prepare for, mitigate, and respond to the effects of drought. NIDIS maintains the foundation of a national drought early warning system through the development of the regional DEWs, where networks of partners and interested and affected parties share information and actions that help the communities cope with drought. Each one of these drought early warning systems may have the same basic features, but each has a distinct aspect to reflect the needs of each respective region. The goal of NIDIS is to enable the nation to move from a reactive to a more proactive approach to managing drought risks and impacts. I will put the link to NIDIS in the chat here in a few moments. Now, to facilitate our early warning system, more precipitation observations are needed. We encourage you to join CocoRoss, the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. CocoRoss is a unique, nonprofit, community-based network of volunteers of all ages and backgrounds who work together to measure and map rain, hail, and snow, and to report conditions. Observations by CocoRoss observers of precipitation events and the lack of precipitation are important ways to capture and improve our understanding of weather. To become a volunteer or to learn more, please go ahead and visit cocoross.org or contact your state coordinator. The links will be provided in the chat. Now, understanding how drought impacts you is important for drought assessment at the state, regional, and national levels. The National Drought Mitigation Center Condition Monitoring Observer Reports, or CMOR system, is a great way to submit the impacts you're experiencing from too much or too little water. Becoming a regular observer makes this information more accessible to those who assess drought in your state. Links to learn more and to view reports, again, will be in the chat. Now, if you came across this webinar in any other way than a direct email to you, and you want to receive the recording and other pertinent information for the Missouri River Basin Drought Early Warning System, please follow the link in the chat to sign up. You might also be interested in our bi-weekly Drought Times newsletter and our tribal engagement newsletter. Lastly, thank you all to our speakers who will be presenting today. We will provide all speaker contact information and presentations after the webinar. And lastly, please mark your calendars for our next webinar, which will be held on September 25th. Direct registration for the webinar will also be placed into the chat. And with that, we'll go ahead and transition over to Zachary Wellman.
Great, and if you could just give me
There you go, Zach. You should be
Great,
presenter.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm assuming you can all see my full screen.
That's great.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you, Jason. And again, my name is Zach Hoylman, and I serve as the Assistant State Climatologist for Montana, and I'm a research professor at the University of Montana. I'm excited to be here to kick off today's climate and current conditions recap for the Missouri River Basin for this inaugural webinar. We've been seeing a lot of variability across the basin in recent months. Some areas have remained persistently dry, while others have benefited from above average precipitation. And today I'll walk through some of the key climate and drought indicators like precipitation and temperature, as well as a brief outlook of fire activity and some seasonal projections and outlooks. I have a lot I'd like to discuss today, so I thought I'd start by getting us oriented on what I will discuss. Here's a quick outline of what I'll cover. I'll start with recent 7-day precipitation totals and then move on to 60 and 30-day precipitation and temperature anomalies. Following this, we're going to look at recent patterns of evaporative demand, current drought conditions and recent changes, current wildfire activity, seasonal climate outlooks, and wrap it up with a quick summary. I'm going to attempt to keep this to about 10 minutes before handing it off to Scott Doomer for the hydrologic conditions and outlook section of the webinar. Okay, so I wanted to start by looking at very recent precipitation totals. Specifically, this map shows the last 7 days of precipitation across the basin. Colors range from purple, red, and orange, which represent higher rain totals, to blues, which represent more moderate rainfall, and dark green to light green shows little to very little or no precipitation. As you can see in this map, precipitation has been quite variable across the domain. Unfortunately, we're seeing continued dryness in western Montana and Wyoming, while places like eastern Montana, the Dakotas, and Nebraska have picked up significant rainfall over the past week. As you will see in my presentation, these short-term patterns generally reflect what we've been seeing across the summer, depending on timescales. Moving on now, I'm showing you temperature and precipitation anomalies for the last 60 days. On the left is the temperature departure from normal over those last 60 days. Here, white represents near normal conditions, blue represents cooler than normal conditions, and red to orange represents warmer than normal conditions. As you can see on the west side of the basin, especially in Montana and Wyoming, there has been consistently warmer than normal conditions, while the rest of the region has seen more moderate temperatures. On the right, we're looking at precipitation as a percent of normal over this same 60-day window. Brown areas show below normal precipitation, while green and teal areas represent wetter than normal conditions. This map clearly shows that the upper basin remains dry, while the central and lower basin have received more consistent moisture. These spotty patterns of precipitation are generally consistent when we look at more recent periods as well. For example, moving on now to more recent anomalies, these 30-day maps reinforce the same patterns we just saw. Generally, warmer than normal temperatures are concentrated in the western portions of the basin in Montana, and as well as the southeastern portions of the basin, with most other areas remaining close to average. Precipitation, again shown on the right, over this period has been much the same. Persistent dryness in the northwestern reaches of the basin, and generally wetter than average conditions downstream, especially in places like Nebraska, South Dakota, and eastern Wyoming. Okay, moving on now, I want to show you patterns of atmospheric dryness. These two maps show the Evaporative Demand Drought Index, or EDDI. This metric helps us to understand how thirsty the atmosphere has been, essentially how much moisture it's pulling from the soils and vegetation. The color scale here is centered on white, which represents near normal atmospheric demand. Blue indicates lower than normal atmospheric demand, or more humid or cloudy conditions, for example, and red indicates elevated demand, which is typically related to heat, dryness, and or windy conditions. As you can see on the left, over the past 30 days, much of the mid-basin has experienced lower than normal demand. But over the last 60-day period, shown on the right, we can see that persistent signal of above normal demand in the upper basin, particularly in western Montana and Wyoming. So these locations in the upper part of the basin have had both lesser than normal precipitation and warmer than normal temperatures, which drive more evaporative demand from the atmosphere. These conditions have real consequences. For example, the Blackfeet Tribal Business Council in northwest Montana declared a state of emergency in early June due to this intensifying drought. This declaration enables access to emergency resources and supports water conservation and public health. It's a reminder that beyond these maps and indices, there are real impacts playing out on the ground with real communities and real people. To help us gain a better picture of overall drought conditions across the basin, we move to the U.S. Drought Monitor maps. Here's the most recent U.S. Drought Monitor for the Missouri River Basin. The color scale here ranges from yellow, which represents abnormally dry or D0 conditions, to deep red, which represents exceptional drought or D4 conditions. As we may expect from the previous slides, drought is most severe in the northwestern portions of the basin, particularly in regions like western Montana, while the central and lower basin remain with spotty drought conditions due to long-term persistent drought conditions. So how has the drought monitor changed recently, you ask? These maps show the 1-month change on the left and 3-month change on the right to those U.S. Drought Monitor classes. Green areas indicate where drought has generally improved, while yellow and brown areas represent where drought has intensified. As you can see on the left, over the past 30 days, we've generally seen a worsening drought conditions in places like Montana, with some improvements in the lower reaches, with notable improvements in locations such as Nebraska. Taking a broader view on the right, the 3-month map shows generally similar patterns, with improvement across southeastern Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Nebraska, thanks to these more favorable moisture trends and precipitation, which we've been seeing in the past several slides. These drought conditions further impact other natural disturbances, like wildfire. Here I'm showing you 2 depictions of wildfire conditions. On the left, you can see the current satellite-derived wildfire activity maps, which shows mostly concentrated fire activity in the west and along the northern Rockies. However, going beyond the U.S., you can see that there is significant wildfire activity in Canada, which has been impacting smoke conditions in the U.S., Midwest, and East. On the right is the significant wildland fire potential outlook, which shows elevated fire risk in red across the country. As you can see, areas of particular concern in this map are in the western U.S. and in the Missouri headwaters region. This reflects the same dry, warm conditions we've been seeing in the upper basin and will be an area to watch in the coming weeks. Now moving on to NOAA's Climate Prediction Center, or CPC's climate outlooks. More specifically, these 2 maps show NOAA's outlook for August. On the left, we are looking at the outlook for temperature. As you can see, there's a lot of orange and red areas on this map, which indicate above normal temperatures are expected and likely, especially in Montana, Wyoming, and the upper basin. On the right, I'm showing the same map, but for precipitation. Brown areas show higher chances for below normal precipitation, while green areas indicate wetter than average expectations. Again, we're seeing high likelihoods of below normal precipitation in the northwestern portions of the basin, with equal chances of above or below normal elsewhere. Summing up the recent conditions we've discussed in this section of the webinar and latest outlooks, this particular outlook shows drought conditions are expected to evolve from now through the end of October. Brown shading indicates locations where drought is likely to persist. Yellow, where drought is likely to develop, and green areas show locations with potential improvement or removal of drought. As you can see, across the Missouri River Basin, nearly all areas currently in drought are expected to remain in drought or see it expand. This includes the upper basin, particularly in the northwestern portions of the basin in Montana and the northern Rockies, where conditions remain consistently dry. Let's all hope for consistent rainfall and cooler temperatures to alleviate this drought across the basin. And now to wrap up, temperatures have been above normal in the western portions of the basin and more moderate elsewhere. Precipitation has been below normal in the upper reaches of the basin and above normal in the lower portions of the basin. These conditions are contributing to ongoing drought stress in locations such as Montana and Wyoming, while areas like Nebraska and South Dakota are seeing improvement from long-term drought conditions. Generally, evaporative demand and fire risk mirror this geographic split. And finally, climate outlooks suggest continued warmth and dryness in the northwestern portions of the basin, suggesting a higher likelihood of continuing drought conditions across the basin at large. We'll keep an eye on how these patterns evolve, especially as we head into late summer and early fall, and update you at the next webinar. But for now, I'm excited to pass the mic off to Scott Doomer with the National Weather Service. Thank you very much for listening and your attention.
Thank you, Zach, for that presentation. Scott, you've been made presenter. Look forward to the hydrologic update. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason and Zach. My name is Scott Doomer, and I'm with the Missouri Basin River Forecast Center. The 28-day average stream flow conditions show new record lows in north central Montana, central Wyoming, and portions of Colorado, with much below normal conditions in extreme southern Nebraska and in northern Kansas, much below normal in western South Dakota, and below normal stream flow in western North Dakota. Looking to the right, the Missouri Basin as a whole is sitting right between being normal and below normal when compared to the 28-day average runoff. State duration hydrographs for Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado are all showing the same pattern, which unfortunately is much below normal when compared to the 28-day average runoff. This is due to the less than normal spring mountain runoff combined with the lack of rainfall this spring and summer. Conditions are worse than they were last year in Montana, while conditions as a whole are about the same as they were last year in Wyoming. Hydrologic conditions compared to last year have considerably worsened for Colorado. The picture is much brighter for the states of North Dakota, South Dakota, and Nebraska, where as a whole, runoff is in the normal range for North Dakota and in normal to close to above normal for South Dakota and Nebraska, thanks in part to significant rainfall the past few months. Lastly, for Iowa and Missouri, this is the area that has received the most rainfall this spring and summer. As such, runoff values for Iowa are above normal to close to much above normal, while runoff values for the state of Missouri are firmly in the above normal category. With spring mountain runoff below normal, widespread moderate drought to isolated severe to extreme drought conditions exist in Montana. Colorado is experiencing moderate drought in southeast and eastern Colorado, while western North Dakota is in moderate drought, while southwestern South Dakota, western and south Nebraska are experiencing moderate to isolated severe drought conditions. In the lower basin, northern Kansas has moderate to severe drought conditions ongoing. With this said, soil moisture has improved slightly across the basin, with Montana being the exception. Currently, 38% of the Missouri River Basin remains in drought. This is an improvement over last month, where 48% was in drought. Despite predominantly dry conditions basin-wide, episodic flooding has occurred in the last month in the Marie-des-Cines Basin in Kansas, the Smoky Hill in Kansas, the Osage River Basin in Missouri, the Platte River in Missouri, the Grand River in Missouri, the Missouri River tributaries below Kansas City, and the Platte River in Nebraska, as well as the Big Sioux in South Dakota. This flooding was caused by a series of strong storms and heavy rainfall systems. Looking at the current conditions in the Missouri Basin, elevated river levels are forecast for the James Basin in South Dakota, the Grand Basin, the Osage Basin, and the Missouri River mainstem in Missouri. Looking ahead, our office issues 90-day river flood outlooks towards the end of each month. The most recent 90-day outlook was run in late July and covers the 3-month period now through late October. The map I am showing on this slide depicts the result of the river flood outlook at 400 plus locations we monitor across the basin. Flood risk is denoted by the color of the particular river station, with green meaning less than a 50% chance for flooding, orange being greater than 50% chance for minor flooding, red for moderate flooding, and purple for major flooding. Our most recent river flood outlook indicates that areas with a greater than 50-50 chance of seeing flooding through late October is in eastern South Dakota, eastern Kansas, and the state of Missouri, with minor to moderate flooding being outlooked. Risk for flooding between now and late October is dependent upon the timing and location of any significant rain events. As we near the middle of the 3-month period, which would be into October, thunderstorm activity in the lower basin will continue to drive flooding in that area. In summary, Mountain spring runoff was below normal. Stream flow the past month was much below normal in Montana, South Dakota, Nebraska, and portions of Kansas. There was recent flooding in Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, and South Dakota. Flood potential exists in Missouri, eastern Kansas, and eastern South Dakota. Thank you, and this concludes the Weather Service hydrologic conditions and outlook.
Thank you, Scott, for that update. We'll now transition over to Miranda Meham, who will provide us the agricultural impacts update. You've now been made the presenter. Thank you, Miranda.
Right, thank you. I think the theme that's coming out is things are variable across the Missouri River Basin at this time. One thing, though, in looking through Seymour reports and visiting with different contacts across the region, is that we all kind of came into this growing season with the same concerns. We came out dry fall, lower than average snowfall for a lot of us, and precipitation over the winter. So there were a lot of concerns about drought moving into this growing season, and for the most part, things have improved as we've seen, with the exception of some areas. So one of the impacts, just with the timing of the precipitation that we did receive, is that in general across the region, there's an expectation of yield reductions of small grains, and this is being seen in some of the areas within the southern part of the basin where harvest has already started or is being completed. Some of the things that were discussed were winter wheat having poor tillering, drought stress of spring wheat, and these two photos are from North Dakota, different areas. And so obviously one area in the lower photo that's receiving adequate precipitation, and the other area where we have a poor stand in the time of year where we're near harvest, if not already harvesting. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as I move through. So highly variable, but there are some poor stands and the rains that we did receive were just too late to improve yields on stands in a lot of areas. We look at some other row crops, so soybeans and corn, is that they're expecting reduced corn yields in some areas, just with drought stress, worries about fill on that corn as we're heading into the hotter part of, or we're in that hotter part of the growing season where corn fill should be taking place. And with where we're at in growing degree days, we're not quite where we normally are. And so there's concerns about what's that going to look like? How is that going to impact our yields? This is a photo from central North Dakota where their corn is tasseling at 4 feet, and this is from last week. In the same way, similar to corn, soybeans, in some areas are not producing pods, and there's concerns about pod fill as well. In southwest South Dakota, there was an irrigation district that nearly had to issue shutoff orders, and they did get some rain in time and didn't need to do that. So in areas with more irrigation, that is a concern. The other end is that we do have areas with too much water now, and so in Kansas, parts of South Dakota, we're hearing reports of increased disease that's just impacting yields more than drought stress. Also lodging, depending on when that water and when the storms have come through. A lot more extreme weather, at least in the Dakotas, and that's resulting in lots of storm damage to our crops. Hail, the week of June 20th, or June 20th alone, we had 20 confirmed tornadoes in North Dakota. Extreme wind, we've had a couple more events recently. From those events, that June 20th event alone here in North Dakota, lots of replant of soybeans, they were sheared off because of the timing of those tornadoes and the extreme winds that came along with that storm system. As well as we've lost over 5 million bushels of storage capacity in the state. So significant agricultural impacts with storms and also too much water across the region. On the pasture and forage side, because of the timing and us being dry early in the growing season, widespread reports of cool season grass production being decreased. So depending where you are, your cool season grasses are going to start early on, and they're either going to be pretty much done growing, 90% of their growth, by the end of May or the end of June, depending which part of the Missouri River Basin you're in. However, in states that have a larger warm season grass production component, production for those seems to be up and has kind of offset that reduction from the cool season. As we go farther in the northern part of the basin, North Dakota, South Dakota, we don't have as large of a warm season component. So we have been seeing cool season and lower reports of lower forage production across both our range, pasture, and hay land. I've heard reports of up to as much as 50% reduction in hay in parts of North Dakota alone. Kansas, Montana, there's reports of pastures going dormant, and with that, we have a decrease in quality, which is going to impact performance of our livestock, and then leads to supplemental feeding and that need to either purchase grain or supplemental hay to bring in to feed those animals, and that's going to come with a large economic component and increase on production costs. And there's been increases in prices because of availability in some regions, specifically Montana. Hay prices are pretty high, and so it's making that decision of whether or not to supplemental feed hard. Early on in the season, and I'm still hearing reports even in North Dakota where we have a little more water more recently, is reduced surface water. And so I've heard reports of producers needing to haul water to livestock or not use pastures because of that reduction of surface waters if they're depending on dugouts. This is a picture from western North Dakota from last week of a stock dam that's low. Animal actually got stuck in the dam, so there's also some animal health concerns and safety. As we look at that, we've also been getting concerns with water quality because of those water that reduced surface water, and our mineral components are becoming more concentrated. Of specific concern is high levels of sulfates, which can be toxic to animals at high enough levels, but even at lower levels can cause things like abortions. And so a huge concern. A handful of reports of cyanobacteria or harmful algal blooms, but overall I'd say those have been down compared to previous years from what I've heard up in our region. And as with us being cooler across and wetter, that is what we would expect. A handful of livestock deaths have been reported due to heat stress, and I think part of this is because of the high variability, going from a relatively cool week to a week that we are 20 degrees hotter, and so the animals just aren't as accustomed to that heat. One thing that is a concern as we move forward with some of the timing and drought stress of our small grains especially is nitrite toxicity, and just that importance of testing forages, because those forages can accumulate nitrates when they are drought stressed or stressed, and that can be toxic to animals. Basically, for those of you that aren't livestock folks, it's kind of like blue baby syndrome in cattle. It inhibits oxygen uptake in the blood. So as the previous speakers have discussed, precipitation has been variable. So we look at percent of normal for April through July. There's the northwest part of the basin is well below average, and we have other areas where it's highly variable in the central part or eastern part of the basin or central plains. This correlates with our soil moisture, where when we look at the topsoil, we're not in too bad of a place for topsoil with those blue areas, but it's still depleted as we go to the southern basin and western part of the basin. And as we go farther into or lower into the full rooting zone, there you can see the areas where we are having long-term drought in the northern part of North Dakota, across Montana, and the western part of the basin. Temperature departures from normal for April 1st through June 30th. We're a little bit warmer, but not too much. What has me concerned, or we've seen impacts of on the agricultural side, is the eastern side of the basin. We actually are behind in growing degree days because we've been cooler than normal during that time when our crops really need to accumulate those growing degree days to grow. And so we have seen a delay in our crops, and probably a week to two behind in a lot of crops. Even when we've had hot periods, it's just not enough to make up for this departure from normal and how far behind we are in growing degree days. So look at that long-term drought. It's expecting that to continue as we've seen from the previous speakers. And those are the areas where we are seeing the most intense impacts on our agricultural, especially in terms of crop production and that forage production. That risk for flash drought, really minimal across the basin. There's a couple spots in North Dakota, Montana, and Kansas where there is that potential for flash drought to develop, but overall a low risk for that. And those areas appear to be areas that were already in drought, so it's going to be a flash intensification of those drought conditions. So in summary, on the agricultural side, decrease small grain yields, that's already set. There's a potential for reduced corn and soybean yields depending on what we see for heat and growing degree days in the next month. Cool season forage production has been reduced. Because of that drought stress on those small grains especially, there's going to be a potential for high nitrates in forages as we go into that feeding period this winter. And so being prepared for that and testing our forages before we're feeding animals. Water quantity and quality should be monitored, especially in those areas that are impacted by drought, to make sure that there's adequate water for those animals, but also that there isn't any potential toxicities in those waters. And with that, I'll hand it off to Callie and Hannah to talk about drought decision tools. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Miranda, for that presentation. And Hannah, you've now been made the presenter. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, everyone. We are excited to be presenting today. My name is Callie Serber, and I am an extension educator at the University of Wyoming. And I will be presenting with my colleague, Hannah Rogers, who is a research scientist. And we will be talking today both about the YCHEX grant project that we work under, as well as some resources for agricultural producers adapting to drought in Wyoming. So starting off with a little overview about the YCHEX project. It is a 5-year USDA NEPA funded grant led by UW Extension, and that's University of Wyoming, I should specify. And the goal of our project is to enhance the resilience of Wyoming's rural agricultural communities by increasing drought and extreme weather awareness, preparedness, and responses. And we have a few objectives to achieve this goal. Some of those include: 1, identifying and adapting tools that translate weather data into more user-friendly and actionable resources for Wyoming's agricultural systems. 2, to facilitate knowledge exchange. And 3, to create accessible outputs for existing research. And I wanted to quickly touch on this technical service provider needs assessment that has helped inform the project that we're doing under YCHEX. So essentially, 6 focus groups were conducted between June 2023 and May 2024. And these were with 49 total participants representing these technical service providers, specifically in agriculture. So those are folks like state, local, and federal government agencies. Think people like the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And then there were also representatives from universities and community colleges, groups like that. So people who are really boots on the ground working with agricultural producers. And the questions and goals of the focus groups were really to understand what needs exist for agricultural folks within the weather, climate, and water areas. And findings were kind of clustered in these 5 groups. 1 were drought, weather, and water concerns. And then needs were found around data and tools for decision-making, human capital and resources, research and local relevance, and then finally community resilience. So these needs in these focus groups are really what is directing and informing the focus areas and projects of the YCHEX grant project. If you're interested in reading more about that, you can click on the link or scan that QR code. And I will pass it off to Hannah to talk a little bit about some existing resources that we would like to kind of inform folks about.
Hi, I'm Hannah Rogers. I'm a research scientist at the university, and I just wanted to talk about a few resources that we've been sharing or working on adapting to help Wyoming producers. The first is the U.S. Drought Monitor, which I believe Zachary went over briefly earlier in the presentation. So these are maps of drought severity released weekly, and they're actually used by groups like the Farm Service Agency to trigger disaster declarations and other federal disaster responses. So these maps can be really helpful for understanding when you might be eligible for some of these responses, like low interest loans. The National Drought Mitigation Center has a lot of other really helpful resources. One is the Drought Management Database, which allows you to look up research specific to your area. So you can filter by things like region, cropping type, and practice, and see what research has been done on that practice in your area and whether it has worked out. They also have a tool to look up disaster assistance programs and to help you figure out if you might be eligible or if a farmer or rancher might be eligible for different disaster programs. One tool that I want to highlight that's made in collaboration with the National Drought Mitigation Center is GrassCast. So GrassCast is an experimental grassland productivity forecast, and it helps predict grassland productivity for a region across the Great Plains to help rangeland managers decide on things like trigger dates and stocking dates and grazing rotations. And this can help rangeland managers be proactive in managing for drought. How GrassCast works is that it takes fall and winter precipitation and temperatures along with seasonal predictions of precipitation to create these maps that show you whether they expect rangeland productivity to be at average, below average, or above average for that growing season. These maps are released every 2 weeks, and as the growing season progresses, they become more and more accurate as we have more and more data. Managers can also use them in conjunction with these seasonal outlooks, like this one from NOAA, to better help understand whether you might see a little bit more or a little bit less productivity compared to these GrassCast forecasts. The Intermountain West Climate Dashboard is created by the Western Water Assessment, and it's a really helpful one-stop shop for all sorts of different data. So they present a lot of data on drought, weather, snowpack, stream flow, reservoir levels, soil moisture, seasonal outlooks, and a lot more variables. It's particularly helpful because it pulls all of these resources into a central site and really helps managers get an overview of the current, past, and future conditions for their area. And then lastly, there's 3 different planning and resource guides that we found to be really helpful for farmers and ranchers in this area. These tools and these guides are all available for free online, though you're also welcome to email Callie or I, and we will send you copies of them. And we will also show you a link to access a guide that lays out all of these different resources with clickable links in the next slide. But anyway, these 3 different resources include this Navigating Drought in Wyoming guide from the University of Wyoming Extension. That was developed to help the Wyoming ag community identify, prepare for, and navigate drought impacts. So it goes over some really helpful strategies for drought adaptation and what the research says about how well these strategies work specifically in our Wyoming environments. The second is the planning guide for the Great Plains ranchers from the National Drought Mitigation Center. This guide helps rangeland managers prepare for and manage drought, and it includes information on things like a ranch inventory, critical dates, how you can go about monitoring, and then it actually walks rangeland managers through developing a drought plan that is specific for their operation, which can be really helpful so that you have these plans in place before drought starts happening and don't have to make all these decisions on the fly. Lastly is this Guide to Federal Programs from Western SARE. So this is a list of programs available, federal programs that can help producers manage risk, conserve natural resources, engage in business development, and other programs. So if you're interested in federal grants but weren't sure where to start, or you want an overview of all these different federal programs and how they can help you manage risk and drought on your farm or ranch, this is a great resource to look through.
Okay, and then just some wrap-up take-home messages and kind of a recap. First is that the WYCHECK project goal is to enhance Wyoming agricultural and rural community resilience to drought and extreme weather. Second, GrassCast is an awesome tool to help predict grassland forage productivity. Third, the Intermountain West Climate Dashboard is a really great one-stop shop for current hydrologic and climate data. And then lastly, those planning guides really aid in managing rangeland and ranch operations prior to and during drought. And I encourage anybody interested in those things to scan the QR code on the screen there and it will lead you to a resource guide put together by Hannah with links to all of these, as well as some other great resources. And then we'll just wrap up with another slide of our contact information. And if you have any questions or ideas, please feel free to reach out to Hannah Rogers or myself, Callie Serber. And yeah, thanks again to Jason for having us present today.
Great. Thank you, Hannah and Callie. Now we do have about 15 minutes for questions. If anybody in attendance to the webinar has any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. Well, seeing no questions at this time, we'll go ahead and wrap up the first Navigating Drought in the Missouri River Basin webinar. Thank you all for joining this webinar, and thank you all to our speakers. We look forward to seeing you all next on September 25th at 10 a.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Central Time. Just a quick reminder that the link for registering for that webinar is here in the chat. And just a final quick reminder that after today's webinar, you will have an opportunity to provide feedback that will help us improve this webinar series. Please take a moment to tell us what you think, and thank you for your time, and have a wonderful day.